Lee, and welcome to the West Virginia News Editorial Board interview. I'd like to introduce our senior reporter, Charles Young, who is with us,
Good morning.
and, our, and of course, our publisher, Andy Nicely. We are here with Democratic candidate Natalie Tennant for the West Virginia Secretary of State. Natalie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much. I appreciate you all taking the time to have us candidates on and talk about our record and what we want to do for the future. And the same for those watching. I know that we are doing a lot of work on the computer and on Zoom and like this. So I appreciate any time that you give to hear what I have to say. I am Natalie Tennant. I am running for Secretary of State again because, like you, I believe and I want to see a West Virginia that welcomes businesses and diversity, respects workers, and embraces innovation. And I know that we can do all this with cooperation and helping each other out with our West Virginia spirit and our West Virginia pride. Because I was Secretary of State for 8 years, where we modernized the office and streamlined the office and saved businesses time and money, saved taxpayers money, and gave back millions of dollars. But I'll tell you what I'm most proud of is the way that we treated people, the way that we treated businesses and workers and our colleagues. And quite frankly, that's what this race is coming down to. It's coming down to decency and dignity. And it's so important to have that in the Secretary of State's office. And I'll tell you, as I point out the differences between me and my opponent, that even court documents show that on the first day after I was gone, 16 employees were illegally fired. And it cost the state $4 million, the largest payout in state history. And people were fired. I had been working with the current Secretary of State on a smooth transition, and they came to us and said, well, we're firing these people. People like Lena, who was 2 weeks shy of 20 years of service to the state of West Virginia. Now, that says a lot. That says that she worked her way up, and she was a nationally recognized expert in elections. And she was gone, though. She was gone without thought, without cause, without even being interviewed by the current Secretary of State. And that hurt West Virginia, hurt her and 15 other employees. And so, that's why I say that this is about decency and dignity. The same goes in the way that we treat businesses. I was just on the phone with someone who has some concern about why we don't have the electronic web-based portal that was promised back in 2015. And I was trying to explain to him, I worked with Republicans and Democrats to pass that legislation, and it just hasn't been implemented in the last 4 years. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more. So I'm running to bring that back. I'm running with to finish the work that hasn't been done and to put even more ideas like I did over the last 8 years. And I know that we can do this together with courage, cooperation, and vision. I believe in West Virginia, and I'm looking forward to implementing even more ideas. So thank you all very much.
You kind of touched on part of the first question, so that I didn't want to interrupt, but you mentioned some of the things you did in your prior term as Secretary of State. What would you consider to be some of your biggest accomplishments during that time? You mentioned saving taxpayers money. Could you go into that a little bit further, please?
Sure. I mean, I'm glad, John, that you said, what were some of them, not the one. It's always hard when people say, what's the first thing you're going to do? What's the number one thing you're most proud of? It's a combination of things because it's the environment and it's the attitude in which I ran the office. And we'll continue kind of on this talk about business. I just felt that we could use technology and online services to grow West Virginia and to help businesses. When I got into office, only 11% of our businesses and charities were filing their annual reports online. And that means a lot. That means that, otherwise we were getting stacks and stacks of papers. By the time I left, about 90 or a little bit more than 90% were using the online services. So that meant much more efficiency. And in doing so, a business owner said to me, well, when we have to file these online, there's a transaction fee that we have to pay. And I looked at that and I said, you're right. So I evaluated what we might save by not having to hand input it to using the electronic form. And I said, we will absorb this fee and we will make it easier on business. So I took that fee off. It's since been put on. So when I'm back in the Secretary of State's office, I'll take it off again. Um, so that's what I'm very proud of, because it was that attitude of how we could save money, how we could be a little bit more paperless, and just use the efficiency that we have. Also, sticking with businesses, I worked with Republicans and Democrats, and we passed a veterans waiver that made it easier for veterans to start a business and not have to pay the startup fee and not have to pay the annual report for the next 4 years. And it's hugely successful. There are thousands and thousands, and it saved hundreds of thousands of dollars so far for veterans. Here's what I want to do next with it. We need to expand it to military spouses, because military spouses are have some of the highest unemployment rate. And you would think, why? Why is that? Well, because military spouses go with their spouses when they're deployed. And there are potential employers who aren't going to hire a spouse because, oh, you're only going to be here for 9 months, 15 months. So those spouses might be starting their own business. And we want to make sure that they have a welcoming, as I said, welcome business, make it easier. I want to expand that to military spouses. We did the same for young entrepreneurs when we waived the fee for young professionals 30 and under who wanted to start a business. So that's kind of the business side. Maybe we'll get into elections. I want to make sure we have a good back and forth, and I'm getting the questions answered that you have.
Absolutely. Let's move to the next one, and we're going to dive into the elections because there's so much concern that's been raised on election security. It's been made an issue by a number of people. What are your thoughts on election security in West Virginia? Do you feel confident that there's enough election security? Are there changes that you would make in terms of providing that safe voting experience for all West Virginians?
When you say election security, John, you're kind of like putting this whole huge blanket or umbrella over everything, and we can break that down a little bit when it comes to election security, because you want to make sure, maybe even from the beginning, that our voter registration database, our database of voters, is secure. So there are many steps that are put in place with firewalls and various security measures. Now, I will tell you that in 2016, when we first became aware of the foreign interference that might take place, I was part of those calls with the national DHS, Department of Homeland Security. And so we went to work right away for the 2016 general election in West Virginia. We went to work right away and accepted the assessment that DHS was having in various states, in various Secretary of State's functions. The next step that I did was work with local DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and I put in place the National Guard. I was the first Secretary of State to have the National Guard embedded in the Secretary of State's office for the 2016 election. Now, you all probably didn't know that, because that was a time period when we were in the midst of it, and I didn't go around saying, oh, we have National Guard embedded, we have them here, we have them there. No, we just did it, and we made sure that it was secure, and that's what's been followed upon now. So when we talk about that election security, that's a different element than the whole umbrella. Election security also comes in the form of confidence and making sure that you don't have mixed messages going out. We know that from the experience of other states that do vote by mail, but really from our own experience here of absentee voting, that there are several layers of security, and we saw them in place. And they take place, the example is the postal carrier in Pendleton County. Well, we had a special West Virginia level of security because we had the county clerk who didn't even have to look in the database yet to know that the person who was requesting a ballot knew that that person was not a Republican. So that was the first level of security. The next level of security comes when you go into the database and when the counties will code what ballot was sent to an employee, or not employee, but to a voter. So that's a level of security. One area that I have concern about is this mobile voting app that the current Secretary of State likes to tout and has not been very open and transparent about it, because we know that there was an attempted hack on it Yet he didn't tell us for a year later when the investigation began. He didn't tell us even before the investigation. Hasn't shared that information with the vendor, from the vendor to the public. I even asked for that information. And that's usually common knowledge when you do pilot projects like this. I did a pilot project, if you all will remember, in 2010 when the military and overseas voters were able to vote online. I shared that. I did reports back to the legislature, but he didn't do that. And so MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, did their own investigation and did their own report and found that it was hackable and vulnerable. And that's why it's not being used now. There can be this rouge about, oh, we do this and we do that. But let's just break it down and look at the facts and look at the true information that was sent out. So, um, I mean, you talk about election security, it comes in all of those different forms.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of segueing. I think you mentioned voter registration, and there are concerns. And I know in talking to some of the local delegates and things like that, I think in the past legislatures, there's been efforts to do like same day registration to vote and different things to loosen up some of the restrictions or guidelines that, like I think today is the last day that somebody can register to vote in West Virginia. Okay.
Right.
There's been efforts to tighten that up against the election day. There's been efforts to, like I said, do same day voter registration. How do you feel about same day registration? And do you believe West Virginia's rules are too strict and prohibit people from registering to vote?
Well, first off, let's define what you're saying a little bit. You cannot loosen the rules on who gets to vote. I mean, you have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to match where you live, your age. So those requirements don't get loosened. You may be referring to when someone can register to vote or how they may be registered to vote. And so if you're an eligible citizen and you're 18 and you're a US citizen or a naturalized citizen and you live within the district in which you want to vote, shouldn't you have all of those opportunities? So first off, I'm proud to say that I'm the Secretary of State who has brought more voter registration advances than any other Secretary of State. And so let's look at that. We have online voter registration, which was started 5 years ago. And there were some folks who didn't think we should do it. Even some election officials like, no, we don't want online voter registration. And I'm thinking, why not? I mean, there was even a college student who had to sue to get to use the system. And the college student was correct. Now, 5 years later, we don't even talk about that because it's what is commonplace now, and it's a good thing. And it's a good thing because here we are on the last day to register to vote. We're going to push a lot of people to go register online. And thankfully, I had the courage to put that in place. Um, and so then the next step is the automatic or automated. It should be called because automatic kind of gives it like, oh, there's no authorization to it, and it is. It's the same thing as online voter registration. The county clerk still authorizes whether someone can get registered to vote. The simple form is that when you go to the DMV, instead of being asked, do you want to register to vote? It just informs you you will be registered to vote unless you decline. And that's the action of the citizen to decline because they can do that if they want. And so that hasn't been implemented yet. And that's a darn dirty shame. Republicans and Democrats came together on that. And if you keep asking for delays, then it's easy to blame the legislature, but it's not the legislature to take blame for that. And then I also implemented the electronic registration information center, which county clerks are using now to help keep the voter rolls clean. When you talk about all of this, oh, we cleaned up the voter rolls and we did this and we did that, I put that in place. And actually, in 2016, if you all will remember covering these stories 4 years ago, current secretary criticized me for it. And now he wants to take credit for it. So that's a fact. And then also, we're tracking our absentee ballots. I can't really say is that official form of registration. It's a form of tracking your ballot, and we started that back in 2011. So, when we talk about the future, John, that you want to talk about, you can see what we've built on, and we certainly should take a look at any opportunity, any election advances, like ranked choice voting, like risk limiting audits, like same day registration. I know that there have been people who've tried to push that through for many, many years. It's the voters who are the ones who are pushing it, just like they did in Maine when they have ranked choice voting.
To follow up on that though, do you feel like, because I mean, you said you like 5 years ago implemented computer registration and things like that. Anytime that you change the process, you're taking chances. Okay. Do you feel like with technology today, there's enough safeguards in place to further that out? Because I think that's the difference, like with same day registration and some of the things that have been discussed in the past. There was always the question, well, how are you going to verify that person's really who they say they are? And how are you going to verify they're a citizen and meet the guidelines that are clearly in place to vote, as you mentioned? Do you feel like the technology is there to allow that now?
That's interesting that you say anytime you implement technology, you take chances. I'm not sure I mean, that's a very broad statement that doesn't necessarily bode true, because sometimes you use technology to stop the risks. And so that's how you have to measure your risks. Yes, there are safeguards in place. The same, in some instances, online voter registration is a perfect example because I've been telling a lot of folks about it. Do you realize that to use the online system, you have to have a driver's license or a state ID with the DMV? So first off, you have to put in that number. Let's just go with the driver's license. You have to put the driver's license in. In addition, if to go online, you have to have the last four of your digits, Social Security, to be able to make the next step on the page. Do you realize that when you use, darn it, I had some paper applications for voter registration. You don't need either of those. So you see what I mean? It even gives you more sense of security because you're using that online and because you have gone through some of the steps that the DMV requires also, where you don't have that in for a paper application. And remember, it's not just one thing that's the security level. It's many different things because the county clerk still has the authority to authorize and register someone to vote.
Talking of county clerks, let's talk a little bit about that because I think that, the Secretary of State is the ultimate chief election officer for the state of West Virginia. But with 55 counties, there's 55 county clerks who are responsible for each of their counties. So the Secretary of State has to be really able to unify those people and be able to um, find a consistent method for handling elections. I know everything is in code, but there every year it seems like, and I know that it was true while you were there. I think it's true currently. There's always at least one or two, and sometimes more county clerks that are like, "Well, we're not hearing this, or we're not sure about this." And so, what about communication with county clerks? How would you go about making sure that everybody's on the same page? To provide that layer of security that you just mentioned to make sure the election goes as smooth as possible.
All right. Well, you kind of mentioned that and answered some of your own questions. um, there is, excuse me, sorry about that. The uniformity that comes from election process comes from the state code. But within that uniformity, there is also some ability for the counties to do what's best for their county. Here's a perfect example. I was in Harrison County yesterday, and you guys can walk across if you're and go up on the courthouse plaza right now. You're going to see, if it's time, yep, you're going to see a tent that's out there, and it has two employees from the county clerk's office who are sitting there accepting ballots into a ballot box, not necessarily a drop box because the Secretary of State currently won't allow that to happen. But that's not taking place in other counties like that. They're doing other forms. They're doing other systems. So does that make Harrison County wrong? Does that make the Secretary of State wrong because not every county is doing that? And so the uniformity comes in understanding that under the state code, this is what you're able to do. And so when counties step out and do what they what they think is best for their voters, then that's okay. What I do for the county clerks, I have photos from Facebook. If it's on Facebook, it's real, right? It's legitimate. I have photos from Facebook where I have meetings after meetings that I have with the county clerks, and when we're discussing various aspects, like automatic voter registration was the most recent that I worked with county clerks on. And so that's what I would continue. I would continue with the committees that I had. I would continue with the meetings that I have and welcome the counties in. I would continue with working with the association leadership, but also the Association of Counties leadership. It used to be Patty Hamilton. We all know her. Now it's Jonathan Adler. And so that's where it's important to do that. Here's what I'll do though too. Unlike the current Secretary of State, who likes to say he's following exactly what every single county clerk wanted, you all have to push back against that, because that's not the case, and that's not even one bit true, because we don't have the applications that were sent out for the primary election for the general election. He's refused to do that. But there were county clerks who said, he's not right. That's not good judgment. He's not right about that, and we are going to send out applications ourselves. So Lincoln County sent them out. Ohio County, which really does elections differently than any other county in the state, and Monongalia County even put the applications in a free newspaper publication. So they bucked him. They went against him. And you know what he's doing? He's not reimbursing them for the money that they spent. Even though he says he has $2.8 million, even though he says it's for elections administration, he's not doing that. And that's not right. And I won't do that. I would reimburse the counties and even open it up and tell the counties if this is what you want to do. But I feel like he's strong arming them. And in one case, I mean, you can read it from a newspaper. He kind of threw one county clerk under the bus up in Monongalia County. So that's what I would do differently.
You mentioned 2.8 million. And would 2.8 million cover the expenses of 55 counties?
It did in the primary election. Excuse me, it did in the primary election.
Okay.
According to the current Secretary of State, if I'm sure you all got his press release about that. He said it was 1.5 that was spent, so that meant there's 2.8 left.
Okay. While the Secretary of State's election duties tend to overshadow other responsibilities, the office also handles, we mentioned business registrations, but one of the things that I'm not sure the people of West Virginia understand is that you guys are the official record keepers of all the governor's actions, the legislative actions. I think while you were in office, and you can correct me, you probably had 15, 16 people working in your office, I think. Is that correct, or was there more?
Ask that question again.
How many people are in the Secretary of State's office?
How many employees in different divisions?
Yes.
Or the whole office?
Yes.
I would say there were about 55, I do believe.
Okay. So,
yeah, 15. You scared me with 15 or 16. Remember, it's the 16 that he fired that he wiped out a third of the.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So, with all these responsibilities, though, how do you prioritize the various duties? Because I mean, that official record keeping position is, something that preserves history and makes sure that if there's a question about code, it's easily found and that type of thing. So how do you prioritize all those duties, Natalie?
Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting question that you ask. And I'm not sure that one responsibility is overshadowed by another. You're right. I mean, elections is taking the spotlight right now, but business and licensing happens every single day. There are people who are walking. Well, they're not walking in now. I'm not sure how they're actually. I have a phone call I've got to return because someone's saying they can't get the information they need. And so you don't really prioritize one over the other. I guess I'm not understanding your question.
I guess the question would be, do you feel like, I mean, I think everybody understands that the Secretary of State is the chief elections officer and is very much front and center. Okay. I think people in business understand the business registration, but I'm not sure too many other people do. Is there a need? I mean, there was even discussion, and I go back a ways, but there's been discussions about doing away with the Secretary of State's office before in the state of West Virginia. So, is there a need to educate the people about what the Secretary of State does? Would be a follow-up question.
I think that's a fair question. Yeah, and I remember that. And what did the people of West Virginia say about that, John?
Oh,
When
they obviously rejected that idea.
exactly. I guess because Ken Heckler was the secretary then, and you aren't going to go against him. Um, so yeah, that's been questioned, that's been asked, questioned, and voted on, and so the Secretary of State's office remains. I believe so, and I believe that you're right, because sometimes I don't think people really understand how much a part of their lives the Secretary of State's office is, especially. I think about this with notaries. I mean, we need um, buying a car, you need a notary. Buying a house, you need a notary. And a lot of different activities in life, and those notaries are registered in the Secretary of State's office. Now, I think you're touching on or scratching on something about like the third division of the office, which is really like the Secretary to State Government when you're talking about the keeper of the rules and the proclamations, and especially for you all who are in the media, the sunshine, you all know how important the Secretary of State's office is, and the website is when it comes to meetings and complying when state agencies complying with the Open Meetings Act. That's where you go to look on the Secretary of State's office website. And I'd also like to mention to you all, since we're talking media and we're talking transparency and openness within the Secretary of State's office, um, the database that I helped and helped to pass with Republicans and Democrats, and I can remember Tim Armstead was a real force in wanting to get this also. So we worked with them to have a FOIA database, and FOIA is Freedom of Information Act database. And what that database does is it allows citizens and the media to see who has requested something from a state agency, and the agency then puts on the database, this is what was requested, this is how it was answered, yes or no if it was answered, why or why not. Well, the current Secretary of State has shut that down. He can't shut down the fact that people are still asking FOIA requests or that the agencies answer them or not. But what he has shut down is the transparency part of what is being asked of the agency. And he'll say that he's not. He'll throw up a screenshot of something that doesn't take you anywhere, but I can show you the document where he sent to agencies that says we are suspending it. And that is unconscionable. And every media, every reporter in the state should be so upset because they rely on that. And they should be questioning him about that.
Andy or Charles, do you guys have any follow-ups you want to ask there quickly, or?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the absentee balloting. Um, you know, because of COVID-19, kind of opened that up for everybody to have any reason they want
Yeah.
to do absentee voting, and a high percentage of people have taken advantage of that. So, tell me about your thoughts on absentee balloting, and how do you think it should be going forward?
After I call this the COVID election, the COVID election of 2020. There are a lot of things that we have to look at because also in this COVID election, because of a state of emergency, there has been a lot of leeway given to elections that allows for what you just said, Andy, is, anybody can ask for an absentee ballot and not really have a reason and just call it COVID. There were, the processes. John, you talked about the processes of a uniform process. Well, because of COVID, there was an emergency rule that was given that allowed the counties to start processing the ballots earlier than is in code. And so we will have to look at this the first, legislative session that will begin in February. I think that there's going to be a lot of talk, Andy, of maybe we just make absentee ballot requests no excuse anyway after this, because you have to have an excuse and you have to write it down. And there could even be some HIPAA questions or HIPAA violations. And when you talk with county clerks, you see that many of them, before COVID, they would look at that application and they would be like, they would grant it. So why put the county clerk in a bind when we could just make it no excuse absentee, and still have to request that? So I think that that's going to be something that is contemplated, and we are definitely going to have to go back and make sure that none of these rules that have come about because of state of emergency or emergency rules become state law without being what the legislature intended.
It would require the legislature to enact that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Pass
Exactly.
the emergency rules right now in place.
Yes.
So, and that would be one way to, that would kind of go back to the one question we asked about the restrictions is, because there is a clear sign that people seem to like to vote absentee and vote when they want to vote.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
Charles, anything you have, my friend?
Well, kind of to follow up on what Andy just asked, throughout this election cycle, the president has come out with, what you could nicely call some misleading information about absentee voting. We've heard that parroted by the governor at times. Do you think it's the responsibility of the Secretary of State as the chief election official to come out and set the record straight on those things?
Oh, most definitely. And that's what has me frustrated about this current Secretary of State. You can look and see the what's the word, talking out of both sides of his mouth, misleading information, like saying, oh yeah, get your absentee ballot, we have all these coming in, all of this coming in, but I agree that it's dangerous. He should never be saying that. I heard a county clerk just today, I'm in Charleston right now, so I'll tell you, it was Kanawha County clerk, just today say how safe it was. And she went through the process of saying that we code the request when it comes in, we code that ballot when it goes out. So there's nobody over here by the river printing off ballots over here or throwing ballots in the river. And it should be clear cut, and don't make it political. Just say, do what the county clerk in Kanawha County said. This is the process that it goes through. And I kind of explained that a little earlier with the clerk down in Pendleton County who was on it like that. So yes, no sidestepping, no misleading statements that are confusing, because it goes back to what John says. It goes back to security. And if something is confusion, voter confusion is voter suppression, and lack of voter confidence, voter suppression. So every time some contradictory statement comes out, then that causes questions.
If I can, one more follow up to that same topic. Any concerns about the delivery of these absentee ballots through the U.S. mail being delayed? What's your thoughts?
I think that there is a way to work in concert with the Postal Service. We know that there were 33 million Americans who voted by mail in 2016. And did we question any of it? No. And we know that there are these percentages that are so very small when you look at those. And so 2020, obviously, it's 2020. It causes us to look at a lot of different things. So I don't have a concern with the Postal Service. Going back to Kanawha County, some of the concern was the county clerk had not paid up on her prepaid, which caused our applications and some ballots to be slowed because it hadn't worked. Everybody has to do their part in all of this. So here's what my suggestion was. If you're concerned, and I see people, you see what Susan Thomas did in Harrison County. I thought that was a brilliant improvisation of the Dropbox form, having people sitting outside accepting that. And other counties are trying to do the same. I thought that we should have secure drop boxes allowed and available in all the counties. The current Secretary of State said, no, we can't, it's not in code. Well, heck, we changed a whole lot of things with emergency rules already. You could have allowed that to happen, because here's what it does. It lightens the load for the county clerk's office instead of having to greet a customer every time they come in and take that ballot. It gives the confidence to the voter knowing that went into a drop box that was secure and that is being monitored 24/7. And then it lightens the load for the Postal Service too. So there are solutions that are out there that weren't just taken.
Well, Natalie, we're going to, are we good, gentlemen? Anything else?
Yes, sir.
I'm good.
Natalie, we're going to allow you to wrap up there. Why should the people of West Virginia elect you as Secretary of State?
I'm hopeful. Well, I don't know if everybody had the opportunity to watch this, but if you want to know what I've done and what I'll do, you can see in that that I am someone who comes with passion and experience and a willingness to look beyond what we already do to help out folks, to help out businesses, to help out voters, to help out the media even when it comes to that. And so I have these ideas. I have a record of this, and I will treat people with decency and dignity. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to talk about $4 million that was the largest payout in state history because of the actions. And we didn't really get to talk about the online portal that should be in place instead of wasting money on a building. And that's what I do. I save money. I do things efficiently. I use technology, and I use innovation, and that's what I'll continue to do. So I ask the people of West Virginia that let's work together. Let's use some vision, some courage, and I'll be brave again so West Virginia can be bold, because I believe in West Virginia and I can believe this and believe what we're doing. And I ask folks for their vote. Learn more about me at natalietennant.com. Natalie Tennant for Secretary of State.
Natalie, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.